Okay, so it's about 1 minute to 2, so I think we can get started. We can get going. I'm just going to do a quick introduction here. Amy's been standing up front, but saying hello to everybody. I'm Jenna Collins. I'm our collections manager, and we're so happy to welcome you here to the History Center for our talk from Amy Jo Hahn here. I'm very pleased to introduce her and to have her here today. So Amy has been writing for many years and is the author of both fiction and nonfiction books. She's a native of Southeast Minnesota, having grown up in Harmony. She has a bachelor's degree from Winona State University and her master's from the University of Arizona. Hidden History of Rochester, Minnesota here is her second book from the History Press. The first, plug. Okay. The first being Lost Rochester. So Amy, thank you so much for joining us today. And a little bit of housekeeping here. So Amy will present, and then we'll have time for questions afterwards. Folks joining us virtually, you can please type any questions you have in the Zoom chat box, and I will read them aloud for you. Amy will also be signing books afterwards. We have books available for sale in the gift shop. I think you've got a stack right there.
I brought them in from the gift shop, so you can, I can sign them here and then you can go purchase them out there.
Yeah, we also have Lost Rochester out there as well if you're interested in her other book as well. So, and then I've also been asked to give a good plug for our memberships here at the History Center of Olmsted County. One of the perks of that membership is to get in for free to talks like this. We love having local folks from the community and beyond come in and talk about history and things that really matter. So thank you so much again for joining us, Amy. All right. Okay. For Jenna to sit down.
All right, well, I do this once in a blue moon, so hopefully I will advance to PowerPoint slides. All right here. And as my t-shirt says, I am introverted, but when we talk history, so presentations, I'm always like, oh. But I do love talking history. As Lee knows, he's a volunteer here at the History Center, and we have great conversations about history and Dana as well. So I always like to visit about it. All right, so Hidden History Rochester, Minnesota is the topic today. It was released in August. It is my second book, as Jenna mentioned. The first one was Lost Rochester, Minnesota. So we're going to focus on hidden history today. How hidden history came to be, I always get a lot of questions about this. So what happened is I had written Lost Rochester, Minnesota, so that kind of helps that I had that one already written, and this is the same publisher. So the History Press Arcadia Publishing published both of these books, and they focus on doing local history. So they really are into the local small history books across the country. And so it is part of, I also get asked about too, like, how did I come up with the title? Or this actually is Hidden History is a series within the Arcadia Publishing History Press line, just like Lost Rochester is as well. So Lost is, a series. So there's other Lost books within that series. This is Hidden History. And so it's Hidden History is another series. So that's kind of how it came to be. Lost Rochester's main focus, the difference, let me just talk about the difference just briefly. Its main focus is historic buildings, businesses, and places that no longer exist here in Rochester. And Hidden History's main focus is kind of feature stories on historic people, events, and sites, which might not be as well known or haven't received as much spotlight. Or for local historians who are really passionate about this, they probably recognize stories in the book, but I try to find new things and new twists, new information that other people might not know and has not been covered as much. So a little bit about me. Jenna mentioned my education. So I have a BA, a mass communication and journalism. An emphasis was English writing from Winona State University, master's degree from mass communication media management with a higher education emphasis. And that was from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University. And I did get to meet Walter Cronkite, so that was very cool. And then he signed a program and everything. I got to talk to him, so it was great. And I have a certificate of historic preservation from Bucks County Community College in Pennsylvania. So that was my most recent thing that I did because I really was interested in historic preservation. And my career is very varied. I was just saying that earlier in a conversation that I have lots of interests. Even in my writing of books, I write romances as well. So I have genres. I love all genres. I read all genres. I write all genres. I'm interested in many things. As you can tell from my education, my background is journalism. That's where I started. I was always interested in being a journalist and writing books too. I had both interests. So I have print and online media. I've been a writer and editor. I've been a producer for broadcast news, TV right here in town for KTTC and Fox 47. I'm a health educator, writer, and editor, managing editor for Mayo Clinic. I've been a college instructor where I have taught cinema, American cinema. I've taught journalism. I've taught English and composition courses. I've also had a variety of articles published, including historic articles. Minnesota Historical Society, I've had some published there, and I am a historic researcher as well. So I've done research for historic exhibits, including one right here at the History Center, which was the suffrage exhibit. So I did research there to try to find out about the local suffrage activists here in Rochester. So that was really fun to do. And I also have done various other history projects, like our oral history project as well for my hometown of Harmony. So I've done a variety of things in history. It's just always been a passion of mine. I get a lot of questions about the publishing process. People are very interested in it. First of all, you have the book idea. And for Lost Rochester, what happened with that one was that the acquisitions editor actually contacted the archivist, Krista, here at the History Center, and asked if she knew of any writers that were interested in writing about Rochester. They really wanted a book about Rochester. And I was volunteering here in the archives department, actually, and she knew I was interested in doing some more historic writing. So that's how I got connected with Lost Rochester. Hidden History of Rochester, Minnesota, they actually contacted me directly and said, hey, would you like to do another book? Which was nice. So I wasn't even trying. So that was really, really lovely. And actually it was about a year after I couldn't do it right away. I wanted to, and we kind of wait. He kept touching base, and finally it worked out. So what you first do is you do a book proposal. So even though they approached me, I still had to do a book proposal for Hidden History. And so for both of them, but for Hidden History as well. And what that includes is stories. You want to give examples of the stories. You want to give examples of photos that you are going to be able to have access and permission to use in your book. You want to talk about they want you to talk about resources that you have. Like for me, I was volunteering at the archives department, so I knew people here. I was very well aware of what we had here in this wonderful treasure trove of historic stuff that's here. If you haven't been here to the archives department, I really highly encourage people to go. Like I said, it's a treasure trove of information. They want you to list media outlets as well that would be willing to cover about your book, like people in the TV business or at the newspaper or the magazines, whatever. And my background is media, so I do have some of that. So that was always a good thing. List of local retail businesses that would be willing to sell your book. So you also have to list that as well. The word count and the photo count that you think your book might have. Now, granted, there is a maximum word count they have, so you can't just keep writing and have as much words as you want in a book. They do actually have like kind of a range of a word count for you. Feel free to count it down. No, that's okay. You want to list, they want you to list your education and background and your career. So really you actually give them your resume. I actually sent them my resume with the proposal and the publishing and history experience that you have. So there's a lot going into that. There's a lot of work up front that you even though I'd already had Lost Rochester, I still did the same thing for Hidden History. And what they do is then they take that, I submit it, and the acquisitions editor takes it to the board, the publishing board, and then they accept or reject it. I was pretty sure they would accept Hidden History because they asked for it. But you never know. You're like, oh, maybe they won't like it. Lost Rochester, I originally actually tried to do Lost Olmsted County. Actually, I was kind of interested in spreading out into the county a little more, but they wanted Rochester. So I submitted it as Olmsted County, but they're like, no, we really want to Rochester. Okay, fine. All right. But so then once you sign the contract, and from the time of acceptance of it to the submission of your images and your manuscript, it varies between 9 to 12 months. And publications usually within 6 months of you get everything in and you approved it. And because it's got to go through the whole publication process for them on the print side. However, the pandemic did affect this time around. It was kind of crazy. Even here at the History Center, there was a shutdown too with the pandemic and everything happened. So researching got delayed a little bit. There were things that happened too in my own life. I was moving, there's all kinds of things. So in the pandemic, so it was really wild. So it actually took a little bit longer. Things were delayed just slightly, but it was a unique situation. So, and they were like having that problem throughout. Plus they were having supply problems and everything else on the publishing side. So I think it was a little wild on their side, just as it was on mine. So, so then you, research, and I was here a lot at the History Center. And then I tend to do all my research. I just, focus on that. And then I write it is what I end up doing. So everybody does it differently. And then you submit images first. And so they range as about 60 to 75 images in these books. And so you submit those first about a month before your manuscript is due with the captions. And you write the captions too as the author. And then you also submit cover images. And there's usually about 4 or 5, and you have to just kind of give a reason why they're important to Rochester or, to your topic. Why do you want them on the cover? So you're kind of defending your choices. And so you have a brief description of both of them and why they're relevant. And then you submit the manuscript. And then they send you the cover and you approve a publication. Basically, all you're doing as an author is going, yep, title is okay. Your name is spelled correctly, and the back copy is a-okay. You can't change it. The image, they've chosen it out of your 5. I mean, you had 4 or 5. And mine, this, is mine. And it's the circus. If everybody really likes this picture, by the way. I got a lot of compliments on it. And it was Linda here at the History Center who recommended the circus as a great topic. And then she said, there's great pictures of elephants going down Broadway. I'm like, okay. And everybody loved this. And I had a feeling they were going to pick this picture because they love cityscapes too, like the streets. They love to put those on the cover. In fact, Lost Rochester, I always like to tell a story. People find it amusing. I find it amusing. Is I submitted my 4 or 5 images to the publisher. And then, you get the email like your cover and you're like, yeah, so exciting. And you open it up and like, okay, I like the picture, but it was not one of my options. So it was not what I sent you. They'd chosen a different picture from the book. And that picture was a city. That's why I was pretty sure they probably were going to like the elephants down Broadway because they kind of chose this one, another streetscape, see, of a theater in town. And I love the picture, but it wasn't one of my choices for the cover. So it's just kind of funny in Lost Rochester. But this one I was like, I wonder if they're gonna like the elephant one. And they did. So, so then that's all you do. You can't change it. Once they choose that, you just got to make sure it's correct, spelled correctly and everything. And then your manuscript email is going to the copy editor and they're reviewing it and they're giving you feedback and you go back and forth several times. Now they're really good at things like your grammar, things like that, but they don't know the history of the, local history. So you really need, double check that. And they usually do. I'm usually like, this one thing's so scary when you do nonfiction. You're like, oh my gosh, am I going to get a date wrong? Am I going to get, and you're human. You do the best you can and you hope, okay, it's all good. And then finally you say, okay, it's good. The manuscript is good to go. The manuscript first a doc form, then it's a PDF form and a layout. Then they go to layout and design. And then you read through that and you make sure everything looks okay. Sometimes that goes back a couple times, 3 times, and then it's ready for design and publication. And then the author gets to receive copies of the book about a month before it's finally released. So that just gives a little overview of the publishing process, just because lots of people are interested in that and curious about it. So I also get asked what goes in and what stays out. It's really hard. There's so many great stories. And I go with, for this book in particular, I had lots of suggestions from volunteers here at the History Center. I talked to Lee, I talked to Linda, I talked to lots of people about what are some stories that you think would be good to have in this book? This book that's more about stories that aren't getting the stories haven't gotten the coverage that other stories have gotten. And then, of course, there's a few of my favorite stories that I had learned about while working in the archives, or I used to do some write up these little stories for it was KSMQ for their our town. So it was a historic segment on their show. So I kind of had an idea of some things I wanted to do. And also interesting and surprising little finds that you know, discover along the way that you really know is hidden and you never even heard about it before. And then you always look at what's available for images, because images are very important. People are really interested in images. I mean, it just adds to your story. But it's not easy. And this is how I feel. And you have a word count. Remember, you know, these books are maximum, you know, it's a few thousand, it's like 45,000 words or so. So it's a maximum word count. You have a range. You can't really go, you can't have like 100,000 in these books usually. So they're small, they're thin, and you got to kind of, you know, choose what you're going to put in there. So too many great stories, it's very hard. And I pull my hair out a little bit. so this was the final, the front and the back. And the front is the elephants, and the back is the peony show, flower show that was at the Knowlton's department store here in town. And they had a parade with little kids, and they had buggies. The girls had buggies with flowers, and the boys had little wagons, and they had prizes, and you know, it was really a fun time. So I always like that picture. Once again, it's a street, you know, on the streets. I thought, oh, they're gonna like that from my experience from Rochester. But what about the other ones? This was one of my options, was the horse racing at the fairgrounds, which I find fascinating here in town. And I do a story. One of my stories is about the horse racing in Rochester a little bit too. So I was always, and I love horses. So that was one of them. I thought that was kind of a neat picture. And then it was the dedication of the Rochester Airport in 1940. I thought that would be cool with the plane in the background. And then there was the Zembro hydroelectric generating plant, which I also think is a very cool structure as well. Those were my options that I sent to them. And these were the winners. No. Okay. So one of the interesting, I'm just going to share a few of the stories, highlights. One of the interesting things that I stumbled upon that I would say was very hidden here was Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, who is known as the Black Swan. I can't even remember exactly how I discovered her. I was researching something else, and I found this newspaper article about this performer who came to town. And I'm like, well, that's really interesting. Who is this? And of course, I went down a rabbit hole trying to find out who this person was. And it was fascinating. So she performed on an October evening in 1863, and lots of Rochester residents showed up, and they were treated to a really beautiful concert by her. And she was a very gifted opera singer. She was a talented woman and sang in the public hall of a building that was temporarily called the courthouse. Okay, and it housed the Olmsted County government and Rochester city offices. And there's the picture of it. It became the Broadway House. Okay, and in 1867, after a new official courthouse was opened, the building would be known as the Broadway House, and it became a popular hotel and a Turkish bathing house. And the building would eventually be destroyed by fire. But that's where she performed, and it was the courthouse for a short amount of time. And they packed the hall. Okay, the 1st of October to see her. She was nationally and internationally known. She was an acclaimed Black opera singer, and she was known as Black Swan. And her popularity of that first night demanded a second performance. So they were very excited to have her. The reviews were wonderful, and she'd also been in the Twin Cities as well. She was on a national tour. So this was one of those things that she wasn't a resident of Rochester, but how fascinating. Here's Rochester. This is, you know, 1863. Rochester is not that old, and she's touring nationally. Now you'll find that actually Rochester did have a lot of famous people come through, but you know, this was really an interesting story to kind of dive into a little bit and find out more about her. She was born and enslaved in Natchez, Mississippi, and her namesake mistress, who is, you know, her name, Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, freed her mother, and her siblings, and she divorced her plantation owning husband and moved to the north. And then her family moved back to Africa, but she stayed. She wanted to pursue a singing career, and her namesake wanted to sponsor her and help her. So then, while performing on a riverboat, she was introduced to some more wealthy people, and a wealthy couple was so impressed that they arranged for a public concert. And then word spread, and the next thing you know, she was on a national tour. Now, she's been compared to Jenny Lind. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of the famous opera singer Jenny Lind, who was known as the Swedish Nightingale. And they actually did call Elizabeth for a while the African Nightingale, kind of as a play with Jenny Lind. So she was instantly and favorably compared to her. And at that time, Jenny Lind was very famous and was doing a tour through the US. Then she also, the Black Swan, Elizabeth, went over and she performed in front of Queen Victoria. So she traveled to England. She performed before Victoria and the British aristocracy. And she also studied under Sir George Smart, who was Queen Victoria's royal organist, the Royal Academy of Music. So that was very exciting as well. She spent time over there. And then in the audience over there, who Harriet Beecher Stowe was also traveling through Europe, she was an audience member. And she was very impressed by the Black Swan. And she wrote about her in her 1854 memoir titled So Memoirs of Foreign Lands. And she talked about how she sang so beautifully and she could switch between soprano and tenor like that. It was just very impressive. And that it was so impressive that they immediately wanted her on board. They were very impressed with her. So it was just very fascinating to discover her. But what was also very interesting is the location of where she performed. 301 North Broadway, which is very historic in Rochester. So she visited the city only once, but she's very woven then into this fascinating, diverse history of this particular address. So there is what she performed in back in the day. And this is where it is now. It's the Avalon Hotel, which is no longer a hotel, but the Avalon Hotel is a very important historic place here, building in Rochester. So the site of the Olmsted County's first courthouse where she performed is also the site of the Northwestern Hotel, which provided overnight stay to Jewish visitors in the city. And then it became the site of the Avalon Hotel, which is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And this was the first hotel in Rochester that provided accommodations to Black visitors to Rochester, which included Mayo-Clinic patients, entertainers, and athletes. So I thought that was so interesting that she, a Black opera singer, performed at the very same location as where the Avalon Hotel was built. Just that's the fun stuff with history, you know, the connection. They're like, wow. I'm like, wait a minute, where's that? The probably has the courthouse. That's where. Wait a minute, that's where the Avalon Hotel is. Wait a minute. I just thought that was a very neat connection. So, and she was very hidden. Like, you know, this was somebody I'd never even heard of. I had no idea she'd been in Rochester, and it was just very fun to research her. So another person that I found very interesting was Hugh Lincoln Cooper and his engineering marvels. He was a hydroelectric engineer, and he started here in Rochester. So he was actually born in Sheldon in rural Houston County, and he graduated from Washburn High School. And he became one of the world's best known hydroelectric engineers. And he began his career right here in Rochester as a bridge builder. And he built hydroelectric power plants all over the world. So he was in Brazil, he was in Japan, he was in India, he was everywhere. And he was the supervising engineer of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in World War I. So he's based in France, and that's he's well known for that too. So it's he's a very interesting character. He started his career shortly after graduating from high school, and he worked on bridges and railroads in Wisconsin for the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Railroad. And he arrived in Rochester around 1885 with the goal of learning bridge building. And he wanted to work under Horace Ebenezer Horton, who would eventually own the Chicago Bridge and Iron Works Company of Chicago, Illinois. So Cooper and Horton would have a great relationship. However, in the beginning, Horton was not so sure about hiring. So Horton was known he completed his first bridge in 1867, which was a bridge over the Zumbro at Orinoco. And then he also built all over Minnesota, Iowa. He was very, built a lot of them, and then he gained recognition nationally as well. And he actually ended up with his headquarters in Chicago. So Cooper applied and applied and applied. He wanted to be an apprentice. He wanted to work for him. He wanted to learn the trade. Cooper was even willing to work for free. This guy, he was ambitious, and Horton was like, nah, I'm not hiring him. But Cooper was persistent, and it paid off. And finally, Horton said, okay, I'll give you a chance. I'll give you a chance. This guy's untrained. He's a self-educated man, flour mill owner's son. But hey, you know what? I'll give him a chance. So he didn't make it easy on him, though. He sent him to Wisconsin in the middle of winter, in a brutal winter, to build a bridge, and had very poor pay. But Cooper didn't care. Cooper loved it. And he got, Horton became very, very impressed with Cooper. And he also gave him a prestigious position as the manager of the Wabash Street Bridge in St. Paul. So the first one that they built over there, that he worked on that. So Cooper impressed Horton very, very much, so much so that when he moved his headquarters to Chicago after he built the Dubuque High Bridge over the Mississippi River, and that was very impressive. So he got more and more business, and he got expanded, and he merged with another company. He actually made Cooper superintendent and chief engineer. However, our Hugh Lincoln Cooper was like, I like hydroelectric engineering. I'm going to quit. And I'm going to go work for a company in Dayton, Ohio for no pay, because I want to learn all about hydroelectric engineering, because it was a new thing. It's a very new thing. So he was very excited about this. This was his passion. So, and it wasn't long before he impressed those companies' owners, and he was put on the payroll. And then he was promoted to assistant chief engineer. So he didn't stay there very long either. He's like, I'm going to have my own company, and I'm going to do my own thing. And he did. And these are some of the things that he built. And he even built an impressive bridge in the Soviet Union, which is now Ukraine, which was destroyed in World War II. So it doesn't exist anymore. They blew it up in World War II, but it was a very impressive structure. And he actually got a major award over in the Soviet Union for working on that bridge. So this is one of the dams in Iowa that, is an impressive looking dam that he built. And this is another one where they're building it, the Wilson Dam in Alabama, which he was claimed for, this bridge in particular. There's a lot of articles about this bridge, this power plant. Cooper loved his home area, though. He never stopped loving this area or visiting this area. Despite being nationally and internationally recognized and traveling the world, he did come here a lot. He was connected. He married a Rochester girl. Her name was Fanny Graves. She was a very independent young woman here, and her mother and father were very respected society members. Her father was a livery stable owner, very into the race horsing circuit. And Fanny was very adventurous. She was an excellent horsewoman. She was intelligent. She was musically gifted, and she was willing to go with Cooper anywhere. And believe me, he had remote building sites at some of these places, but she went with him. There's even a story about how she went on a cable across the ravine to get to a site. So this woman was, she was probably the perfect fit for him. And so they visited often. The Rochester's in-laws were here, and he had family here, and of course he was from Houston County. And he was recruited home to build the Lake Zumbo hydroelectric generator. So he is the contractor on that and the designer on that, which provided substantial electric power to Rochester, a few miles north. So there's the construction of the plant. He designed the structure and was awarded a contract for it in 1917. Materials were provided by the Omaha Structural Street Bridge Company. Construction began in the summer of 1917, but then he was called away from with World War I. And that's where he ended up being in charge of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So he had to leave the project, and he had to pass it on to a couple of his workers. So there it is, finished. It's a Greek revival architectural style. It was completed in 1919, and it was created. He created Lake Zumbo, and it spans 440 feet. It's 60 feet in height, and the attached power house has room for three hydroelectric generating units, each with the 1,350 horsepower turbine. They only ever had two in there, I believe, unless that's changed, but I think there was only two. But anyways, he was a famous guy who, came here and designed that. So I always thought that was kind of an interesting connection as well. He died in 1937 in Connecticut. And here they're talking about that Wilson Dam in Alabama. It's a good charity. But he was an engineer, but he was a dreamer. He was a lover of arts. course, he married a woman who was very musically gifted. She graduated from a arts performing academy. And so he even talked about how that he had passions for drama and music and all arts, and that they were all contributing factors to his professional achievements. And he believed great engineers had one thing in common: creativity. And when the New York Times asked him to share how to be successful in his profession, he said, "If I told you that the foremost requisite for a successful engineer was imagination, you would not." That's true. So, kind of a well-rounded guy, so good. Another interesting story. I mean, a lot of people know about the Bach music company here in town and the Bach family, but I stumbled upon the whole Empress of Ireland connection, which, you know, the Titanic sank and Lusitania, and now, you know, Empress of Ireland. I'm like, what's Empress of Ireland? So then I learned all about the Empress of Ireland. In the early morning hours of May 28th, 1914, 2 years after the sinking of the Titanic, the Empress of Ireland collided with a Norwegian cargo ship in the foggy waters of the St. Lawrence in Canada. Reinhold, which you'll see both ways of his name. Sometimes people add a T. Even some of the newspaper articles did as well. So there's two ways kind of to have his name. Bach and his daughter Edith of Rochester were passengers on there, as well as their friends. The Cruises were on there too. Father and daughter were on there as well. This is an interior of the Empress of Ireland, which is gorgeous. They were second-class passengers. This is the first-class dining room. And this is the first-class space. I just love those pictures. They're so beautiful. I'm sure their accommodations are pretty good too. This is an article from the New York Times showing where they sank there, the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. It made national and international headlines. It was a big deal. Of course, the Titanic was fresh in people's mind. What happened? 1,000 lives were lost on it. So it was a big deal. And then, of course, the fact that there were some Minnesotans on it as well. You know, of course, the Minnesota papers carried it. It was a big deal. This was the Duluth Herald. And at first, actually, they didn't think he died. The first newspaper accounts were like, everybody's safe. He's alive. Yeah, he didn't. He did drown. They did recover his body though, which a lot of them didn't get recovered, but they did find his body. They did bring it home. So Bach, he was going back to Germany to visit his family. He hadn't been back there since he was a little kid. And so he also had genealogy research and was going to do more research in Germany. And they are related to Johann Sebastian Bach. So they do share a family tree with him. They do share a common grandfather in that tree. And he supposedly had lots of papers with him that he was traveling with, which were lost in the sinking. But Reinhold and his children were very musically gifted, all of them. So it's interesting how they're related to Johann Sebastian Bach. And they also have music, gifts of music. They're, you know, all of them were musicians. So they were a large industrious family. Reinhold and his wife Barbara were among earliest pioneers to the area. They were mechanics, repairmen, farmers, musicians, business entrepreneurs, kind of jack of all trades. I think back then everybody tended to be jack of all trades. The matriarch Barbara was only she died about a year before the Empress sinking. They had the Bach family orchestra. So they performed all over the area and entertained people. Reinhold made violins, and he also made a pipe organ, and his sons formed the Bach Music Company in Owatonna in 1882. And of course, that spread. They had a lot of different stores, including in Rochester. They were respected community and business owners. And Edith is to the right of her father there. Other Minnesotans on that, lost their lives on the Empress, so that they made headlines. There were even some from Houston, Minnesota. So that was interesting. This is one from Houston. The Titanic's shocking demise was very fresh yet in America, around the world. The tragedy made international headlines, and it is considered to be Canada's worst peacetime disaster. Reinhold was mourned very deeply in the Rochester community. It made headlines when his body came back, when they had his funeral, and where he was buried in Oakwood. Edith shared the story of how she and Frida survived. And that was published widely too. Edith was praised for saving herself and Frida Cruz, her friend that was with her. So they talked about how brave she was. It kind of basically said she saved the two of them. And her story was reprinted in multiple newspapers, locally and nationally. It was very captivating, the whole read about what happened to her. And how they found each other, like how they found Frida's dad. They did get separated from him, and then Reinhold as well. But they were all together initially when they felt it happen when they smashed into the cargo ship. They felt it. In fact, it was so strong that they fell out of their beds. And then their fathers came to the door, and they're like, "We better get up to the deck." And then Reinhold went back to his room, and they never saw him again. And they did make it to the deck, the other three. So they did get eventually reunited. The three of them, but then for a time they thought maybe Reinhold had survived, but he had not. And then they had to go identify his body. So it's very sad. And they described that too. So I mean, it's a very captivating, interesting read to read about her. So the Bach Music Company, there's a showroom in town here with pianos, and there's a storefront as well of the Bach store. And the number of Bach music stores grew. They included Rochester, St. Paul, Winona, Austin, and the last Bach music store located in Rochester closed in 1971, and it was sold to Shopkeepers. So, okay, so now I'm going to talk about Lottie and women windwalkers, and I owe this to Lee. Over there, Lee is the one, I think you stumbled upon her, right? Are you the first one who kind of stumbled? Yeah. So he stumbled upon her, and of course we visited, talk. I'm like, oh, this is fascinating. When I asked Lee about, do you have any ideas? Lottie was top of the list. So, and it is fascinating. Not just Lottie, but the women stunt, aerial stunt, they did amazing stuff in the early 1920s in the barnstorming years, in all around the country. So it's a very, I think, kind of an untapped topic. So the Roaring Twenties. The Flapper Girls were dancing in Charleston and getting into trouble. And America was in love with planes. That was the thing. I mean, wow, aerial stuff was super cool. Here we're kind of like, we've had planes forever. It's not as a big deal. But to them, it was new, it was cool, it was fascinating stuff. So they were really interested in seeing amazing aerial stunts performed. And barnstorming became a very popular form of entertainment, where pilots went to different communities across the country and performed these crazy stunts that, back in that day, they didn't have any rules either. There's no laws or rules on how they did anything. They did anything they wanted. By the way, when the government decided we need rules and laws, barnstorming stopped. They couldn't do that anymore. The most famous Minnesotan, of course, the pilot who started in the barnstorming days was Charles Lindbergh. He very well known, of course. But there's all these women that did, some of them flew planes, a lot of them did stunts. And several young women were looking for adventure. Independence was happening in the 1920s with women. They risked their lives to participate in these very dangerous tricks that were performed, hundreds, thousands of feet above the ground. And one of the most famous female stunt artists in the country was Lillian Bower. And there's a picture of her from a plane, and there's a picture of her hanging from a plane. And like I said, no rules, no laws, nothing. They could do whatever they wanted. And there were accidents. It didn't always work out very well. Another famous aviatrix was the Gladys Royce, and she was a Minnesotan. And she was inducted in the Minnesota Aviator Hall of Fame. And she started performing in 1921. And one of her most famous stunts was she played tennis. I don't know. I think that's crazy. I don't know about you. But yeah, she did. It's in the Smithsonian. They have this information. Play tennis on a biplane. And then she was also in a movie. There's her pointing. That was her. Sadly, what happened to her is she died. I think she was about 30. She was posing for pictures in front of a propeller. That was not. Yeah, she fell into the propeller. Oh, very sad. So her end was not very good, and that wasn't even doing a stunt. But anyway, so that she's known for that tennis thing, though. But and she did movie stuff too. She was in stunts, in planes, in movies. They flew a lot of these. This was their plane of choice. Was this Jenny, this Curtis Jan for Jenny? They nicknamed it the Jenny. And that was used by many barnstormers, and of course, in World War I had them as well. But Rochester, getting back to Lottie, had its own aerial stunt girl, and her name was Lottie Rochester. And she was a teenager. And she wowed the crowds when she walked the wings of the planes and she jumped off at shotgun heights with a parachute. She was 16 when she started. She was featured on the front page of the July 5th, 1922 Rochester Daily Post and Record. I really wish we had a better picture. Lee and I have talked about that. But these old grainy newspapers, you just can't get a very good picture of them. But she made the headlines. There she is there. She married George Schermerhorn in July 1920. She was 16 and he was 47. Yeah. She started jumping from planes right after they got married. Commonplace perform was in the skies over Rochester. Many, many people watched fairgrounds here. And sometimes there was confusion as to if she was George's wife or his daughter because of the age. And even a newspaper in Minneapolis actually did report. Father parachuted, now his daughter leaves from the plane. So they did say, yes, that's his daughter. Yeah, no. But her father, her husband, George, he did parachute off hot air balloons. He jumped off hot air balloons. So, yeah. So, there was some confusion of their relationship at that time. Did Lottie want to do it, or was she forced? Yeah, it's a question. You wonder. Some of the articles you read, you're like, yeah, I don't know if Lee gets that a little bit from reading them. You're like, some, go, oh yeah, she loved it. Some you go, oh, I don't know about that. Some news stories hinted at perhaps she was frightened to fly, and she was made to do it by her husband, who wanted more money. And he's actually quoted as saying, women make twice the money jumping from planes as men. And I also wondered, does she get more money because she's only like 16, 17 years old? But he's quoted in the newspaper articles as saying that. However, other newspapers wrote about her bravery and how she didn't appear to be afraid, and she seemed to really like it. So we will never know what the truth is, but and there she is. That is Lottie, jumping from the plane, and there she is. Grainy, but it's the best we got. So I wish we, like I said, I wish we had a better picture of her. Regardless, Lottie inspired and awed communities across the state and the region. She really is considered one of the first to have jumped, one of the first women in Minnesota to jump from the plane. And she divorced George at age 20 and never performed again. So she did stop. So I don't know why for sure, but she chose to fight her life out of that spotlight, and she married twice more, and then she moved to Oregon. That's where she ended up. But for a few short years, Lottie was a local celebrity. People knew her by her first name. She was a superstar. They called her Darren. They called her Darling. They had all kinds of names for Lottie. And she actually inspired a lot of other girls who thought, hey, we can do that too. We can jump too. So there were other girls who wanted to do it as well, but Lottie was the superstar. And she was so famous here that they even had a big headline about her divorce from George. So made the headlines there. She was a petite, darling, thrill-seeker Rochester. She had brown eyes and dark hair, styled in a short, sleek bob with cropped bangs, which of course was popular during the flapper era. And she was kind of known as a wild child. Daring and athletic girl, being a leader in many childish pranks and escapades. And Lottie once said to a reporter about her death-defying jump, "It was all over so quickly that I was sorry, because it is a great sport and the people get a big thrill out of it. I like to do it. I am not the least bit afraid." All right, well, that wraps up what I wanted to talk about and kind of share with you a little bit, but I'm open to questions about the book and start. Okay. There any questions?
What was the elephant all about?
Yeah, so the elephants on the street That was about 1949 or 1950, circa around that. And that was the circus coming to town. So they would come from the railroad and they would march through town. So and I do write about the circus in the book. So and not just like that era, like from the beginning, and circuses were a big deal, especially to rural areas like the Rochester area. It was kind of a cultural thing for them. It was a big event. They put on their great, nice clothes, their top hats. They went to the circus, in the 1870s, 1860s, 1870s. When the railroad came through, then it was even a bigger deal because now they could transport them on the railroad and they put up the big tents and then they parade through town and then they, announce we're going to have 2 shows or whatever it was. And then they get back on the railroad and move to their next thing. So, and there are a lot of interesting articles, neat articles about the circuses that came out. And the different ones. It's almost like studying the railroads. The railroads combine, they go bankrupt. It's hard to keep track of it all. Same with the circuses. They're always merging, or they had similar names, or they go defunct, or whatever. So it's hard kind of to keep track of all of them when you're reading the articles. Wait a minute, which one's this one? This one joined with this one. So, but it was very popular for a long time. Big deal in town. Circuses coming down. Anybody else?
Yeah, Amy, I'm curious what the population of Rochester would have been in the late 1800s.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know, Dana, Lee, what would be the late 1800s?
Around 5,000, 500 maybe. By the turn of the century, maybe.
Yeah. It grew, it boomed. Rochester became like its little metropolitan city here in the cornfields. So, especially when Mayo came, and Mayo Clinic really changed it, of course. Well, really put it on the map. But originally people came here for farming, the land. They came here for farmland. Yeah.
The hydroelectric dam, is that in Homestead County or is it?
No, it's not. It's Mazeppa is I think it's Wabasha. Is it? It's Wabasha County. Mazeppa is the address on it. Yeah. So it's just on the edge though. It's like right there. Yeah.
And then the Rochester got its electricity or some of the electricity?
Yeah, RPU still owns it and that's where they still get electricity from.
Oh, wow.
Mhm. Yeah, so it's owned by RPU, Rochester Public Utilities in town. Yep. But it's only is it 20 miles? I can't think it's about.
And that's the resort lake, right?
Lake Zamro, and that created the lake. Yep, and that's
where Sean has the weekend.
Yep, Sean has the weekend cabin. She's another person here at the History Center. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, Dean.
So Lottie was
Yes.
more of a parachute jumper than a wing walker?
Yeah, she did a lot. She did both, Lee, but I think parachute is her
That's the
big.
first thing she did.
Yeah.
She parachuted out. Her first jump was over at St. Charles. And a couple weeks later, when the Homestead County Fair is on, is when she first jumped here. And when she jumped over in St. Charles, the newspaper and the women over there were really mad about it. They were quite positive that there was a trap door in the airplane because no woman in her right mind would jump out of an airplane. And we thought, well, the airplane part couldn't find a trap door. And a couple weeks later, she was over here and made 4 jumps. And the first one was beautiful. The last 3 were wild and woolly, but she survived them all. And the sad part is the Herbert Riley,
Yeah,
who
the
was
pilot.
pilot that you saw in the picture,
Yeah.
would die a year later.
In Preston.
In Preston.
Mhm.
He was giving a guy a ride. He and the owner of Rochester, was a Rochester Airport, or Rochester Airport, no, it wasn't an airport company, but it was a company here that had.
yeah.
Flew down there for a reason, and she was giving somebody a ride, and the guy got scared, they figured, and he braced his feet, and the airplane had dual controls.
Oh.
So when he braced his feet, he lost control of the rudder, and the plane crashed, so Herbert passed away. But there's 2 pilots by the same name in Rochester, I found out. One was from here, one was from Canada. The Herbert who died was from Canada, so he left, but there was another one. So it just gets crazier.
He
from
does,
there.
he does. You're like, what? I mean, Elizabeth Taylor Greenfield, I mean, her name is the name of her namesake, right? It's the same name, so you're like, I mean, it starts to get, okay, so which one? Okay, how? But, it's, yeah, Lee and I have talked about, you go down rabbit holes, right? And then sometimes you discover something new, you're like, oh, wow, I didn't know history can change. Because you do sometimes find new information, so. Yep.
So when you're gonna write this book, now you must have came up with some ideas that ended up that you couldn't use them because you couldn't find, might have been what you thought was an interesting story,
Yeah.
but the information just wasn't there. Did you?
Yeah,
find that out?
sometimes you'll, like, I know Linda had mentioned she volunteers in the archives, that she was interested in the Strawberry Dam. And that was here in town, but to find information on it was a little challenging to try to find the background on it and where it got its name, things like that. And it was on the list, but so there's things that I had on a list, but then I couldn't find enough information on it to make the story. Maybe someday there will be, but at this point I couldn't. And then I also of course have a timeline that you have to work within, and you have to have stuff finished. So how much time do you spend trying to track down things too? I mean, boy, I'd love to spend lots of time tracking down. It's fun. It really is. It's like sleuthing, you're solving mysteries. And so sometimes there's certain things that, you're like, oh, there's not a great picture for this story either. Like there's no images. Well, then you try to figure out, okay, how can I have an image, like something? And like Lottie's are very grainy, but we were like, luckily Lee had done a little newspaper article on her before, Lens on History. And so they found some of these already and had them in high resolution. You have to scan them in a high resolution to have them printed. And I was a little worried they wouldn't actually accept them because they are grainy. But when I kind of fought for them and said, it's all we got, they're like, okay, it's all we got. We gotta have something because it's a great story. But we didn't have a nice portrait of Lottie or something like that. Like I said, maybe someday we will, but right now I didn't have that. So yeah, and it can be disappointing when you have a great story. I mean, we've talked that too, where he's trying to find a photo or something to go with some story and you can't find it, and it's frustrating because it's a great story. Or you find a great photo and you have like 2 lines on the back. All right, I'll try to figure this one out. You don't always get it figured out either, or can't find information on it. And there's only so much you can search to in the newspaper archives as well that's searchable. So, I think it only goes till 1914 or something when you can search in the newspaper archives here for now. So anything else, it's really trying to find a needle in a haystack. You kind of got to know what year or month or, to try to look through a bunch of newspapers can be challenging. So, yeah.
Did you ever have family members come back that have seen the stories? And give you
Yes,
more
in
information?
fact, right here, right? Didn't you talk about that with Lost Rochester?
Yes.
And your relative again?
Great-great-grandfather owned the Pierce Hotel, and I came to your talk and I went,
Yeah.
that's my great-great.
Yeah, there you go. So yeah, things like that do happen. Maybe Lee's gotten calls too, or wow, that was my grandmother or grandfather, or I didn't know this, and so yeah, we do get that once in a while. Is there anybody else?
Would you ever consider putting out or sort of broadcasting an appeal for photos? Like on social media? Does
Yeah.
Anybody have some old pictures of a lady standing on top of an airplane?
I thought about that. In fact, when I was doing the suffrage exhibit research too, there was a Sarah Clark, who was an activist here in town from like the early like 1870s, and I was like, there's no pictures of her, and I thought, maybe that would be an idea to do a social media posting of, do you have a photo of her? It'd be really cool to have a photo of her to go with the story. So yeah, I have thought about that, even the history, the history center here could do something like that, like for things maybe. It'd be kind of neat to see if they could get anything, because one of the things I always tell people about like something like this, the archives here at the history center, is it really is here because people bring in their stuff. Okay, they bring in their historic documents, their pictures, their family stories. That is how it gets preserved. And so I encourage people to do that and to bring in these pictures, these historic pictures, to bring in these stories to have in the archives in, you know, in your local community and here at the History Center here, because that is how they get this information most of the time, is the donations from people. And then that preserves it for everybody for years and years and years, and it preserves it for your ancestors too, who come research later. You know, genealogy research is big here, people coming in to search for their ancestors.
I got another one.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe Lee might want to answer this too. You know, you always hear these stories about things in Rochester that nobody knows what happened.
Yeah, yeah.
What do you suppose is number one on the list? You know, like they talk about the statues from Statuary Park.
Yeah, the statues, like, where are they? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean,
It's a
is there
big mystery.
something bigger than that? Or is
Bigger
that kind of, or more interesting than that?
Yeah. That's a good question. I don't know.
No?
Yeah, the
Okay.
statues are big. Where are they? Are they buried somewhere, right? Isn't that the idea that they're buried somewhere? Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to give that one.
Oh, I have an idea.
Yeah, please.
Well, it's probably not really, but remember from 1977, there was the candy brand.
Oh, yeah.
Rock.
Yeah, Brock
Brock.
Candy.
Rock candy.
Oh,
Last
that's
week in Rochester, she is said to haunt the
Oh.
Taylor Hotel.
And she was never seen again.
Never seen again, and they think that she was about to rat out some gangsters, and the gangsters killed her.
And put her.
Her gangsters were like in Chicago, but
Yeah, but
she
they
lived
could.
in Chicago, but they would spend a lot of time here doing medical stuff, and she was last seen buying something at the gift shop in the Taylor Hotel.
Because she was maybe flying back to Chicago
I think she-
that night or something.
She was about to leave, I feel like.
Hmm,
She was last seen here, and she's sent to haunt the Taylor Hotel.
okay.
I forgot her name, but she married into
That family, the Candy family.
family.
Brock, okay. Hmm.
Ross.
Very interesting. To see. Yeah, I don't know what would be a number one. I'd probably, guess that's something to think about, like a list of things like that, you know, unsolved, unknown that are still nobody's figured out. Nobody has the end story to them, but. well, Anybody else?
That's your next book, Amy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, mysteries of Rochester.
Unsolved mysteries, yeah.
Yeah.
We did trolley tours, of
Yeah.
like the ghost tours.
Yeah, I did on that one, really? Yeah. All right.
Okay, well, if that's everyone's questions, thank you again.
Coming, everybody.
We'll have her settle in, and if you'd like we said before, there's some up there, you can have her sign, if you brought your own, certainly, I'm sure she's willing
Absolutely.
to sign
Mhm.
those, and then, if you're wanting to buy one here, you can certainly grab one and take it to Darla at the front desk, to purchase after you get signed.
All right.
And we do have a few copies of Lost Rochester as well, if you're looking for that.
Okay.
Thank you,
you, everybody.
everybody.
Thank you. All right. Will you write your name on there?